CSS, about what is CSS, why do we need it, how do we include it to HTML. So that's why I just want to do it as a crash program, because we have looked at this before on our previous tutorial. So CSS, like what we said last time, CSS just cascading style sheets. This is cascading style sheets. So it's a style sheet language used to describe the presentation of a document written in markup language. Like what we were saying last time, that when you're looking at HTML and CSS, HTML is just the structure, right? And then the CSS is now the presentation, is now the layout of the document, right? So it's the most common its most common application is to style web pages written in HTML and XHTML, but the language can be applied to any kind of XML document. You can use CSS to any XML document. So CSS is used to help readers of web pages to define colors, fonts, layout, and other aspects of document presentation. And also it is designed primarily to enable the separation of document content, um, that is the HTML there, and the presentation or the document presentation. So I want to separate this presentation layer, right? This presentation of a document and its structure, right? So that's how this CSS was actually designed. We designed it so that we could separate these two. We have the document for HTML, then we have the other one for CSS. But you would find out that there's some cases where you would mix those two things. So what could be the advantages of using CSS? So the separation of document content and document presentation can improve content accessibility, provide more flexibility, and control in the specification of presentation characteristics, and reduce complexity and repetition in the structural content. So if you look at it, the introduction of CSS now brought some benefits. It's now like we are talking of accessibility. Why accessibility? If we have got the HTML file separated from the CSS, the HTML file will become small, right? In terms of size, right? And then it will be easier to render rather than to have all the CSS and the HTML whatever content in same file, right? So something like that, it provides more flexibility. Also, it will be easier for you to control the structure, or even it will be less complex to you when you're actually coding. Why? Because you'll be not repeating things. Things will be not just junk in there. Remember, when you're doing CSS, if you look at it, when you mix CSS and HTML, you see how ugly it will become. So CSS can also allow the same markup page to be represented in different styles for different rendering methods, such as on screen, in print, by voice, whatever. So sometimes if you look at it, you might have your website look very nice on the desktop, whatever. But when it comes to mobile, then it will be looking differently. So with CSS, it is now easier now to design for, excuse me, for mobile app, and then design for what? For desktop, whatever, something like that. So CSS allows developers to control the style and layout of multiple web pages all at once. Just to remember, if you can have the CSS file, it will be easier for you. Let me accept those who want to join. So it will be easier for you to
All right, you think
and we make sure that let me just disable this camera. Okay. So CSS allows developers to control the style and layout of multiple web pages. How do we do that? We just need to define a style sheet file, and then we include it in any HTML document. Hence, we can just have one or a single CSS file being applied to many pages, just like that. which means you can design maybe 5 pages, 20 pages, whatever, using just one single file there, right? Then there is the issue of the syntax, right? When it comes to CSS, just like almost like any other language, there are rules, right? Or there is ways, or there are ways of writing this CSS, right? So the CSS syntax is made up of three parts: a selector, a property, and a value. I think we've talked about this on our previous tutorial, right? That there's what you call a selector, and I think we've talked about classes and IDs when it comes to HTML, something like that. So you have a selector, these brackets, and then a property and a value, something like that. So any HTML element is possible to be a CSS what selector, right? So whenever you think of a selector, you need to know that any HTML element qualify to work as a what? As a CSS selector. For example, we've got a paragraph. So P, that tag name, the P can work as a selector, whatever, something like that. We can talk of body, we can talk of H1, H2, whatever, all those things can work as what? As selectors in PHP. So in CSS. Also, we have got the issue of our IDs and classes as well that we talk about, right? So the selector is simply the element that is linked to a particular style. So you have this style. So a selector will become the element which is going to be affected by that what? By that style, something like that. For example, we've got this P, which means every paragraph which is um within the file which is linked to this CSS whatever is going to have this text indentation, this one, something like that. So the selector is normally the HTML element or the tag you wish to define. The property is the attribute you wish to change, something like that. So the property will be talking about the attribute that you want to change. Do you want to change the font size? Do you want to change the color? Do you want to change the margin? Something like that. So that one will be your attribute. And each property can take a value. That's what you really need to know. So the property, sorry, is it let's make sure that we are all on mute, unless if you want to say something. Okay. So I think we've got a property and its what? And its value. A property, that root is just an attribute. So the property and a value are separated by what? By a semicolon, by a colon, and surrounded by curly braces. Okay, I think that pattern have changed. So like this, you're having this selector and then the property and the value. This will be your property and this will be valid. They are separated by this colon, and then you need to terminate here. So you need to terminate there. So if the value consists of multiple words, but it also put it in quotes as in like this one, font family, then you put it in quotes. Otherwise, if you put it as two separate words, something like that, then you get an error, something like that. So normally that's how you'll be writing your CSS. And so if you look at it, when it comes to CSS, there are a lot of properties and attributes. So you just need to know which one am I supposed to use, right? If you look at it, we've been talking about font family, color, whatever. Here we are talking about text alignment, something like that. So there are a lot of properties and their values. You could talk about margin, margin top, margin left, margin right, whatever. You can talk about floating, whatever, something like that. So there's a lot of things that comes when it comes to CSS, and it's your work to go and look around those properties and values and how do they affect the HTML element, something like that. So you can specify more than one property separated with a semicolon. If you want to have more than one property, like here, we want to do text alignment and we want to do the color as well to a paragraph, something like that. You could do that by just putting some semicolon after that, like what we do with the C programming, something like that. You could terminate after each and every line, something like that. So to make the style definitions more readable, instead of just writing it like that, you can just put it like this way. After a semicolon there, jump a line, just like that, jump a line, something like that. And then just terminate. So to make that's how you make it more readable, something like that. Okay, thank you for those who are accepting. People want to join. So you can now you can group selector separating them by a comma. What if you want this CSS to affect a number of elements, right? So you just separate them by what? By a comma. What it means is that this whole CSS is going to be applied to all these HTML elements, are going to be applied to all these HTML elements, something like that. So you just need to separate them by what? By a comma. Then there's what you call a class selector. Here we're using the HTML elements, their tag names, whatever, as a selector, right? To identify the HTML element which is going to be affected by that CSS. Okay, then there is a way of doing it using what you call a class. I think we've talked about this on our previous tutorial when we said that a class now is a selector that we can give maybe to different number of what of elements in HTML. And then what it means is that if we pick that class, it means every element which is within that class or which you have got this that class, right? Then it means it is going to be targeted and given that style that we are defining, something like that. So with the class selector, you can define different styles for the same type of HTML element. Say that you would like to have two types of paragraphs in your document, one which is right aligned and one which is what, which is center aligned. Also, how do you do that? Like here, if you look at it, we have got p dot right and then p dot center, something like this. And then there is one, the other one which is aligned to right and then aligned to what, to center. So what does it mean? If you look at it, here we've got a paragraph here, and it have got a class and its name is what is right. And then this one, it have got a class and its name is what is the center. So you can even remove this p and just have a dot right and then a dot center. What it does, it looks for the class right, which is this paragraph, and then you do right alignment, and then this one which you've got the class center, then it will do left alignment. So just imagine you've got maybe 10 paragraphs, right? And you want them to have the same style, something like that. And maybe only want one paragraph to have different styles, whatever. So you put all those that want to have the same style under one class name, which means all of them will be affected by that, what, by that CSS, something like that. And the one that you want to be different from others, then you do not give it that class name, something like that. Okay, so basically that's how you do it. For comments, it's just like what we used to do in C programming, right? So you put your comments like this, right? Outside this, what do you do? I mean, this like this, right? We've got a text alignment, something like this. Yes, so you can comment just like this, forward slash, and then this one and this one. There's no single line comment. Okay, so comments are used to explain your code and may help you when you edit the source code at a later date, something like that. So a comment will be ignored by the browser, like what you always know, the comments that you know in C programming, in Java, whatever. The reasons for those comments are just the same as the reasons of these comments, something like that. Only that you only comment this way. So I think we've talked about whenever you want to include the CSS in your HTML. I think we have talked about mainly three ways that we have, which is the external style sheet and the internal style sheet and inline style sheet. I think we've talked about why do we need to make it external, why do we need to make it internal, and why do we need to make it inline. I think we've talked about this. So when a browser reads the style sheet, it will format the document according to it. So it comes to external sheet, I think we've talked about why do we really need this, and I think this is the most ideal or the best way to apply a style sheet. Why? Because if you really look at why do we need CSS, I think we've talked about the issue of separating the presentation and then the document content, something like that. And this is exactly that you'll be doing when you are doing external style sheet. And I think if you look at it, is the one also which supports every that we've been talking about. Why do we need CSS really? Like if you want to design maybe multiple pages at once, something like that, you need to use external sheet. So maybe the issue is now how do you do it, something like that. So each page must link to the style sheet to using the link tag. So you use this link tag and then link it. How do you link it? This is how do you do it. You do it in the head section, right? So it will be link, relationship, whatever. You put the relationship is style sheet, and then the type of the file, it will be text or .css file. Normally we use the .css file, and then you put the hypertext reference for that file where the file is, right? So if the file is within the same folder with the HTML or whatever, or the PHP file that you want to design, something like that, then you use my style.css. So you just do not need to put whatever the file path, just put the CSS file name, something like that. So I think that's how you link it, right? So the CSS which will be in this file, then will be what? Will be used to style that document, right? So the browser will read the style definition from the file mystyle.css and format the document according to it. So an external style sheet can be written in any text editor. Sorry. So the file should not contain any HTML text, and the file extension should be .css. And this one was just an example where you could have this HR for a horizontal rule being designed here, the paragraph here, and then the board here, and then maybe you just include it using the instead of, so this one, okay, this one is just the internal style sheet. And there are reasons of why do we need internal style sheets. I think we've been talking about this as well. So an internal style sheet should be used when a single document has a unique style. Maybe you've got 5 pages that you have, right? And you have got the global whatever style that you have in the external style sheet that we've talking about. And maybe you have that unique part that you want maybe specifically for that document, then you could put it as the internal as the internal CSS. How do you do that? You put the tags, the open and closing tag for style sheet, and then you put all the CSS inside here, and you do this only in the head section, right, of the HTML document. I think I will demonstrate on this to just show you how do you do that. Maybe we'll start with the external style sheet, then we move to the internal, then something like that. And then so what happens is that the browser will now read the style definitions and format the document according to it. So normally a browser ignores unknown text. So if you put an unknown tag there, then the browser will ignore. Also, if you put some whatever, if you fail to put some temperature, whatever, it will end up ignore that line, something like that. So you really need to be sure when you are typing or whenever you are coding CSS, you need to make sure that you really check your syntax if it is correct. So there's the inline CSS. I think we've talked about what is inline CSS, and normally this one now comes to the HTML element. Just on the HTML element, that's where you put the CSS. So in inline style loses many of the advantages of style sheets by mixing content with the presentation. Like you'll be mixing the HTML and the CSS, which goes against the reasons why do you need CSS. So use this method sparingly, such as when a style is to be applied to a single occurrence of an element, something like that. So to use inline styles, you use the style attribute um, in the relevant tag, just like here. This is the paragraph that you want to design. So you put a style and then you put all your styles just like that, and they need to be separated by just this semicolon to say this one is single line, then next line, whatever, semicolon, just like that. So basically, that's what we do. Then what about if you've got multiple style sheets, like you've got the external, the internal, and the inline CSS, like the order, what happens there. So if some properties have been set for the same selector in different style sheets, the values will be inherited from the more specific style sheet. So you need to know that we inherit from the external, and after the external, we apply the internal. After applying the internal, we apply the inline style sheet. At the end, that element we have the styles on the inline style sheet, something like that. So we just inherit it from that order. So whenever you are designing, the last to be affected is the one which is going to stay permanent on the browser, something like that. So that's what happens there. So that's all on CSS. Maybe what I will just do is to demonstrate maybe a little bit, and then I'll show you what you need to do for you to familiarize yourself with the CSS. But otherwise, this was just the basics of what of CSS, right? So what we have here, I just have this that I called it's demos, whatever. I think I used it last semester. So what I would want to do here is to demonstrate on how do you code whatever, how do you code this CSS, something like that, the inline, the external, something like that. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I've got this PHP file, right? So because I've got the PHP file, for me to execute or to run this PHP file, you always know that you need to have the server, right? The Apache server, that's the one that I'm going to use. So this server is within the WAMP server, right? So for you to run that, you need to put your projects under a certain folder in your server so that you could access them through this local host, right? Or the local server. So here you could say HTTP 127, whatever, that IP address for the local host, or you can just say local host and then slash, then you go to the folder of your project, something like that. So here I've got nothing. Why? Because here I've got what? I've got nothing. So, but if it is the HTML, if you create it as an HTML file, you can just run it directly without the need of a server, something like that. So if you look at it, because I'm using one server, I'm inside uh, local disk C, then WAMP 64, and then inside the www folder, that's where you put your project. So what you see here, these are all my projects that I have on my machine that I've been creating, whatever, doing what I'm doing. So if I just say localhost here, then it will run it will pick the index file. That's why you see that it is empty here. So it will just automatically it will pick the index file if you do not put the exact file that you want to run. So if I want to run a specific file, I will do type that file if it is not the index. Otherwise, I will now need to navigate from the index going to that file by clicking some buttons, whatever, something like that. So that's what will be happening there. And also inside your WAMP server, that's where you have your database. And we are going to use, I think here, I think there's a database here. Okay, so here, this one. This is the database that you, not the database, but this is the PHP my admin. So it's the one that we use to manage our database, creating our databases, whatever that we'll be doing there, something like that, doing the SQL, what that you want to do. That's what you'll be using this one, the PHP my admin. I think you've been using this, right? So I think that's all that I really wanted to show you right for now. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create the basic HTML document. This is the basic HTML document that we would have, right? So this basic HTML document that we could have sort about all these things which are now popping up because I've got some extensions, and so they'll try to give me some next whatever line that I want to put it there, but that's what I not that's not what I want. So what I'm going to do here, let's start with the external sheet, right? So when you're working with the external sheet, uh what happens is that you really need to create the external sheet, the external style sheet first, and then you link it here inside the head section, right? So here I have got this external sheet that the external style sheet that I already have, but you can just create your own. I'm using VS Code here. I can say maybe styles instead of style. Could say styles.css. The extension should be .css, something like that. After this, then I can now put my what? My code, right? That I want to do there. But for now, there isn't the code that I want to put there. What I would want to do maybe is to come here and link that external sheet with this file. So how do you link this external sheet with this file? What I want to do is to use the link, right? We've agreed that you would use this link, right? So I just thought it would do a favor for me. Okay, let me just try to type everything as it is. Okay, so as you see here, just need to put link, and then you put this one for relationship. What is the relationship? Is a style sheet that we're expecting. Also, maybe what you need to put there is the what is the type, right? Here maybe you could also put the type, which would be text or CSS, something like that. And also you put the hypertext reference, and this one is going to be styles.css, the one that I've put. So by doing so, now we have linked the external CSS, which means every that I'm going to design, whatever here, is going to be also affect this, right? So now let's maybe put something simple to this, right? So maybe let me put a paragraph there, and then maybe I'll just say this is demo, right? So this is a paragraph that I've put here, and if I come here, if I refresh this, we could see this paragraph. She said this is demo, something like that, right? So maybe I would want to have another paragraph, and I would say I would say the same, right? So let me just write, then I would say this is demo what. Okay, let me just save it like that. I'm thinking that I will do whatever I want to do. um when I'm targeting the CSS using what? For now, let's go to the CSS. Maybe for now, let's go to the CSS, and then when it comes here, because I want to target I want to target those two paragraphs. So what do you do when you want to target those paragraphs? Now you are looking at selectors. I think we've talked about these selectors before, right? So because I didn't give a class, I didn't give any ID. So which means I just need to use this P, right? Is the what is the name of the what of the class that I want to use, something like that. So because the HTML element, the tag name is P, so I could just do this. And then what do I do now after this? Then here I could give it the color, the font size, like what you are seeing here. You could give it all these things like color, font size, and all those things. So after doing this, if I come here and refresh, you would see that I still have a demo, something like that. Because let me change the color here to something else. Let me change the color maybe to this, right? Let me save it. Okay, so you see that the color here changed to this, something like that. So you could now try to really focus on a specific paragraph that you want to design there, right? So maybe I could have this where, okay, the index. Let me just duplicate this as well, so that we could have a lot of them. And then the last two, let me give them same class there, class, let me just say styled or something like that, right? Class, I'll say styled or whatever, something like that. Let me try to improve the visibility. Okay, so by doing this, what it means is that from here now I'm going to because I've used a class, now I'll use a dot operator, right? And I'll say styled like this one. So I'm targeting that class, and then I'm going to bold and underline those which are just what styled, something like that. And you see that these last two paragraphs have got inherited everything from the external what style sheet, the color and what. But after that, we went on to how to bold them and underline them, something like that. So if you look at it, now we have used the class to target only those that we want to get underlined and get that bold, something like that. So this is what you can do, or that's how you can make use of these classes. So if we have grouped this as what? We've grouped them using the what? The class. Then if you want to only target one, right? So maybe I want to have the other one to have its own ID, whatever, a unique ID there. So you could say ID, and maybe let me just say P1, something like that. and then you go to the styles there, and then maybe you would say, because it's an ID, whenever you're using an ID, you normally use a hash, right? So you would say hash P1, something like that, and then I would put the font size 16 pixels, and maybe the color there to be what, to be blue. So we are only targeting that style with what, with the ID P1. So whenever you're using an ID, use the hash, right? So now this one, it's a unique identifier. So you find out this one is only going to be affected. So if you look at it, it's very, very funny. Like what I've said before. If you look at it, this paragraph that we said P1, you've got inherited this font size and this color, but at the end we've put these colors. So maybe let's see if the magic is going to happen as well if we reorder this, something like that. So I think these are some of things that you just really need to know. Let me just say if this is going to affect the output that we have. It's not going to affect. Why is not being affected? The color blue. I thought the order would also affect that. We've got the font size 16 pixels, and here we are redesigning those paragraphs because it's the external. I think it's not maybe if the other one was internal and the other one was external, something like that. I think that's where we are going. That's where we were going to have that scenario. But anyway, you could experiment with that as well. You could experiment with that and see what happens there. But otherwise, that's how you would use a class. That's how you would use an ID as a selector as well as the tag name as a selector, something like that. That's how you could make use of that. Okay, so that's how you could make use of that. Then maybe now let's look at the issue of internal style sheet. When you want to use the internal style sheet, we've got this index here. So when you want to use the internal style sheet, what you do is, so now let's remove this one that we have linked here. So let's remove this. You no longer want to link the external. So what happens is when it is an internal, you do this. You put the style there as I like in text, and you put them inside the head, right? So you would say style, and then you would close there, and then you put the close tag there, style, something like that. And then in here, that's where you define your CSS. Sorry, I didn't close here. So in here, that's where you would put your what, your CSS, something like that. I do not want all these things. Okay, so normally that's what happens there. And then what did I so you can write every CSS that you think you want to do. But remember the advantages and disadvantages that we have been talking about. Remember, why do you need internal CSS, right? So it's not always the case. So much of the CSS, put it on this external file. But whenever you want to have those unique designs for that specific page, then now put your what? Put your CSS here. Like here, I could just make this paragraph have the blue color, and then maybe everything will just remain the same, just like that. Da da da. So maybe I can have those have a bold, those with the class styled, these ones will be bold, and the color would what will be red. So if I do this, you see what is happening in there. So you could also have the inline style sheet where you would put the styles on the paragraph itself. Like here, I could put the style, something like that. And then here, that's where you put all the styles that you wanted there. Like here, no. Okay, like here, let's look at this one. It have got a font family, whatever you put the font family, then you've got the font size and the color there, something like that. If I refresh this, you would see that this one is now different from others. So this is what you call the inline CSS. Whenever you target the HTML element itself, something like that. So that's all about the CSS. And what I would ask you to do is to go and look at this. Let me do this. Is to go and look at this CSS So you could go through all these, the borders, the margins, the padding, whatever, all this box model. Go and look at this, experiment with them. I think you could try to build something or a project, whatever, and you try to implement all these CSS classes, whatever, all these classes that we have here, the flex box, whatever, the grid, whatever. How do you have this responsiveness, something like that? So it's a little bit huge level that you need to look at, right? So it needs your attention, and you need to really try to build a project around it. Whenever you are doing that, I know you are going to need a lot of CSS classes. So that's how you tend to learn them, right? So you need to know, how do I go around about backgrounds, something like that. How do I go around about borders? If you look at borders, something like that. So you see the borders, how do you design the borders, something like that. So that's what you'll be doing with the CSS. You go for margins, how do I look for margins? How do I this margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left? I think it's just a little simple thing to do. But I think what it does, it needs you to practice and maybe to come up with a project, something like that. Otherwise, now we really need to look at HTML forms, unless if there is any issue with um with the CSS. Otherwise, we would really need to look at HTML forms. But otherwise, that's all on the CSS. You can go and experiment with the CSS. There are a lot of things that you can do with the CSS. But I think for now, let's just leave it. Let's just leave it. And try to focus on other things. Okay, so now let's focus on what you call HTML forms. Right, so for you to take input from the user, normally we use what we call forms in HTML, right? So there was this slide that I would want us to talk about, but I think we would talk about it later when we looked at what you call forms. There's what you call validation. So let's basically look at these forms. So if you want to collect information, normally we do need these forms. And when you are logging in, whenever you visit a website, you end up using a form. Maybe be it you want to log in, normally you put the username, you put the password, then you click login, something like that. And you'll be using a form, right? So how does this, or how do these forms actually work, right? So normally you have something like this as a form. So this form is made up of elements, right? So like what we're saying, like that, in HTML, we've got elements, right? So for a form is also an HTML element. This HTML elements have got its own specific elements, something like that, right? That we use to take what the input from the user. So the form element like this, it will have this tag name form, right? So the HTML form element is used to create an HTML form for user input, right? So normally we write form like this, and then we close it like this, like it's just like a normal HTML element, right? And then here in between you put what you call form elements. So this form have got its own specific elements that we use, right? So the form element is a container for different types of input elements, such as we can talk of text fields, check boxes, radio buttons, and submit buttons, something like that. So all the different form elements are covered in this chapter, whatever HTML elements here. So the HTML input, we've got the input type, the input element, right? Which is the most used form element. Normally we use it the most. Why? Because is the most element which conform to what we always want to take from the user. So an input element can be displayed in many ways depending on the type of the attribute. So normally there is the input with the type text. This one we normally use it when you just want to take a single line text, maybe like my name, my full name, whatever, something like that. And then there's the type radio. We want to use those radio buttons, like if you want to select one choice out of many choices, you can use the radio button, as well as the check boxes. If you want many um many what input whatever from from the user there. The person can use a checkbox to say, I want this and this and this, something like that. And then there is the type submit. This one normally is just a button which will be submitting the form to wherever it is going to be processed, from where to wherever the data is going to be to be processed, something like that. And then there is the type button which will show you a clickable button that you can click. So there are a lot of them. Though it's not only this, but here this is about the input type, right? So here I've got an example here of this form, right? This example of a form which is John Doe there, which is going to take out the first name and then the last name. So if you look at it, we've got this label, right? And if you look at it, this label, we've got an attribute for. And if you look at it, this one takes the ID for the input that we want to give this label. So this label will be for this input that we have here. Why? Because they've got the ID and the name is what is F name. So we are targeting this. So the first name will be for this label, and then the last name label will be for this input, so for this input, something like that. So the form, this one is not visible, but what is visible are its elements, something like that. So normally that's what we'll be doing there with the form element. That's what we'll be doing with the form element there. So you could design it to look whatever you want, but normally you'll be using CSS. Otherwise, you just give it the structure by just saying, I want to take this input, something like that, da 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 da. So that's what you'll be doing there, right? I don't know if there's something that I really want again. So if you look at, we are using also BR to break the line, to skip after what, something like that. I think you really need to take note of that as well. So there is the issue of the label element. I think I've talked about that. Notice the use of the label element in the example above. The label tag defines a label for many form elements, something like that. So the label element is useful for screen reader users, because the screen reader will read out loud the label when the user focus on the input. Like the user, whenever want to take the to put the input in there, you would find that where am I going to put my name? So you need that label to put that label. And then there are radio buttons, right? So you need to put the type radio there. If you do so, you have something like this, right? So you'll be having something like this. So out of many, you just want one choice. So you use that. So if you look at that, the ID there will be different, but it will be having the same name. So when you submit the form, we take only that one which was marked and we leave the rest. So it will be having this. So when you are submitting, we submit the form name, the form with the input type, with the input name as fav language, but the value now we change according to the ID that we are sending, something like that. So the ID now, like here it's HTML, here it's CSS, it's JavaScript. So when we receive the JavaScript, now we know what to do. When we receive something like that, so now the ID now and the value now differs here. If you look at the value now differs there. We have got the value as HTML, CSS, something like that. So when you send this one, then we know that you have sent HTML there and the value is HTML. So the value will be just HTML. So we take HTML, something like that. So that's what will be happening with the radio buttons. So normally you could play around it, design whatever, play around it, having the radio buttons. So you normally use these ones whenever you find where it is necessary, something like that. Is it necessary for you to use that? So my boxes. Also, we need checkboxes whenever I want to take multiple or something like that. Checkboxes let a user select 0 or more options. So whenever I want 0 or more options, then now we can use checkboxes. And you really need to know and look at how are these checkboxes are being formed, right? So if you look at it, normally you give them, here is type is checkbox, and then the ID here it's vehicle 1, something like that, vehicle 2, vehicle 3. And then the names vehicle 1, vehicle 2, vehicle 3. So if you look at it, these are actually, they have got different names. They are different from radio buttons the names were the same, but the values were different. Something like that. In
Excuse
the
me, sir.
IDs. Yes.
Ndandipokwanisa kuedha wanikizwa ndichakwanisa pane wakuda kupinda.
Okay, it's okay. Thanks. Okay, so basically that's the difference between a checkbox and the radio buttons. So you just really need to know these form elements and use them when necessary, right? And then there is the submit button as well that you can use, that you've got the input type submit there. So this one defines a button for submitting the form data to a form handler, something like that. So the form handler is typically a file on the server, which with a script for processing input data. So sometimes you want, maybe it's a form to take the data for login. So you send it to a script which is going to process it and maybe allow the person to log in. Maybe that script is linked to database, whatever, all those things that will be happening in the background. So like here, if you look at it, we've got action page.php. So if you click submit, the data will be sent to this PHP file. And that PHP file, we know what to do with what you have sent, something like that. So basically, that's what will be happening there. Then the name attribute for input. Normally, the input also have got this name attribute. Where is it? Like here, label, whatever. If the name attribute is omitted, the value of the input field will not be sent at all. Okay, sorry. Okay, the issue is that whenever you are creating this input, you need to give it a name. Failure to do so, whenever you are sending the form is, the element is not going to be submitted to the script which is going to process that. Why so? It's very simple. Because whenever you are receiving the data on the script, you need to target the name of the input or the name of the element. So you if you do not give it a name, then we cannot access it. So it's just going to be ignored, something like that. So normally, basically, these are some of the elements that you can use. They are not all the elements there. These are some of the elements that you can use. If you look at it, we've got these ones, legends, flip set, whatever, button text area. Yes, we've got text area. We can have also the select, where you want to select maybe one option, the one with the drop down, something like that. So these are some of the elements that you could also make use of, something like that, like this one, which have got select and the options and values, something like that. Let me look at this, like here, where you could select and then you submit, something like that. So how do you do that? You use select and then you give it a name and then you put the option values. So the value that you are going to select is the one which is going to be sent with the element select there, something like that. So that's what happens there with the select. I think that's the most very interesting one that we have left there. And then the text area, if you want to take multiple lines instead of just taking one, like a full name, something like that. But now you want to take a paragraph or something like that, and then you use the text area like this one. Then you define number of rows that you want and number of columns there. Then you something like that, boom, you have this, and then you would type whatever you want and then you submit all those things, and then you handle it to wherever you submitted that. So basically these are some of the HTML elements. And maybe what is very, very important that I would want to talk about maybe is the form attributes, where we talk about the action, the get and the post, something like that. Why do we need that? And maybe we'll talk about the what do we call it, the validation, and maybe we'll try to process a form there, create a form, process it, send it to maybe to database if you really want, if we really want to do so. And so that you to see how do you link the database, how do you do the PHP, how do you process it, and then I'll ask you to go and do the lot of work by practicing, and maybe we'll do one final tutorial where we'll do a live session, a live coding session, and then we'll try to help each other. How do you answer, or how do you approach this question, something like that. So if you look at it, here we've got the issue of minimum and the maximum attributes. So these ones are normally very, very important for those values, maybe that takes on the input values, that takes numbers, whatever. I can put the minimum and the maximum for date. If the input type is date, you can put the maximum of date that you want to take there, something like that. Also for numbers, you can also do the same for those which take number, the input type number there. You can put the minimum is 1, the maximum is 5. So if someone tries to put something outside that, then the form will refuse something like this. So if you try to pick a date there, then it will be having, so it will have the minimum and maximum, something like that. So here, if you put a number there, if you try to go beyond 5, it will refuse, something like that. So here, whatever it was, enter a date before 1980. Here it was say enter a date after this, something like that. So if you try to enter a date before that, whatever, it will refuse, something like that. So basically, these are the minimum and maximum, but maybe what I really want not these attributes for, but what I really want is the form attributes, right? So the form itself also takes its own attributes, whatever, like inside this part here on this text. So it also takes its attribute. So what could be those attributes, right? So if you look at it, we've got this action, right? We'll talk about it. So the input form action like this one that we have in form action, whatever. Okay, this one attributes, the form action attributes specify the URL of the file that will process the input when the form is submitted. So these attributes override the action attribute of the form element. So normally, if you do not put the form, this action, it normally assumes that it's the same file that you are in is the one which is going to handle that form. Otherwise, you need to specify where is the file which is going to handle this data when it is submitted. So if you say /action page, it means that in the next folder or something like that, we've got a file called action page.php. I think we would experiment with this and see what does do we need this slash or not, something like that. There are some scenarios where you do not need that, and maybe there's some scenarios where you need the file path, something like that. So this action is just there to pick the file that you want. So you can pass the absolute path or you can pass relative path. I think we've talked about that before. And then there is the form inc type attribute. This one also is very, very important. So the input form inc type attribute specifies how the form data should be encoded when submitted. So normally we use it to specify this attribute overrides the inc type attributes of the form element. That is the form inc type attribute works with the following input types when submit and and image. So whenever you have images, whatever that you want to submit, then you need to use what? The form inc type. So this one example with the two submit buttons, and the first sends the format data and the default encoding, then the second sends the form data encoded as multiple part or form data, something like that. So I think I need to accept someone. So I think you really need to look at this, not look at this one. But if you look at this one with the form inc type, then the input is goes to mod part or form data. So whenever you are working with this, now we've got want to take files, want to take images, whatever, something like that. So whenever you are submitting that, so it is very, very important to put this form inc type to that, so that we know that there are images, there are files, whatever attached to this form, so that it will be processed according. So you need to put this multi part or form data, something like that here as well, so that we will do also that will be sent that data. So I think I will demonstrate on that as well if I got time. And then there's the issue of the form method attribute. the issue of the use of post or get. I think this is a very, very important thing that you really need to know. You are not just going to use a get method, or you are not just going not get method, but the get global whatever to process your data there, or to just use the post. Why? There are reasons there. Why do you need a post? Why do you need a get, something like that? So the input for form method attribute defines the HTTP method for sending form data to the action URL. So note that this attribute overrides the method attribute of the form element. So the form method attribute works with the following input types. When which is what is that? What is that? Let's look at this. We have got this method get and the method what post. So the notes on the get method is that whenever you're using the get method, this method appends the form data to the URL in the name value pairs. So normally when you're submitting, it writes everything on the top here, something like that. So the method is useful for form submissions where a user wanted to bookmark the result, or there is a limit to how much data you can replay that you can place in a URL. Therefore, you cannot be sure that all of the form data will be correctly transferred, or never use the get method to pass sensitive information like my passwords or other sensitive information. So whenever there is sensitive information, please do not use what? The get method there. Why? Because it exposes everything on the top. Yet when you're tapping on the password, whatever there, and no one could see that. But now when you submit, everything will be there on the top there. So for the post method there, this method sends the data, send the form data as the HTTP post transaction. So I just need to take this call. Just need to take this call.
Yeah, so let me stand in where it says taking score. Well, we are looking on this post and gate. We need to specify to go and look on where they are applicable, why each is more superior than the other, is like the advantages or disadvantages of each. Do you have any question on that one? Hello, Ruben? Tafadzwa? Primrose? Nobody home?
Thank you, Marikela. I think people are good at this. I think people have already looked at this. So maybe
Sure.
what yes, so when you're using the post there, use the post whenever you feel that you have got a sensitive data there. That's really what to submit. Why? Because post is not going to show anything here, it's just going to send the data there. And also you can use it um to send whenever you want that the capability to send the unlimited data, something like that. So you can go and read about it and you would to see why do you need that. Maybe also the issue of the target there. Do you want to open it on the current? Do you want to send it and process it on the current whatever window, or you want to target, or you want to create a new tab, whatever, something like that. So you could also use the form target there. And then there is the issue of validation when you are setting there. I think that one's the some of the things that we really need to look at. So because of time, maybe I'll try to talk about the validation a little bit, and then we do everything as we are demonstrating. We just do everything there. We create a form, we try to submit the form there, then we do the validation. So normally when it comes to form validation, uh is the process of checking that a form has been filled incorrectly before it is processed. There are reasons why do we do that. You will see later on when you are learning security, computer security, information system security, whatever, something like that. You will later on understand why do we really need to make sure that the data which we are going to process is the actual data that we want before even send for processing, something like that. So for example, if your form has a text box for the user, to type some text input. So you might want your form handler to check that they have filled in form text before you deal with the rest of the form, something like that, right? So there are two main methods for validation or for validating forms. What are these methods? There's what we call the server side, right? Where we'll use, for us here, we'll be using PHP to do the validation. And then there's what we call the client side, and we usually use JavaScript. And that's where we normally involve JavaScript. But also there are a lot of use cases of JavaScript that we are not even talking about here. So you could go and code JavaScript, they experiment with it, see what are its capabilities. I think it's going to help you as well. So the server-side validation is more secure, but often more tricky to code, whereas a client side validation is easier to do and quicker too. So there are reasons why do we need client side and why do we need server side. Just imagine maybe you've got a slow network and then you've submitted, we want to log in, right? And then you've submitted your data there. And maybe after 1 minute, then it tells you back that you didn't put a value there on the password. So you are supposed to put a password, something like that. So if you look at that, what it means is that that person will be doing the server-side validation, which means the data needs to be sent from your browser there to the server there, and then the server will say, no, there must be a value here. Then so it's sent back to the user, something like that. So that will be the disadvantage sometimes of a server-side validation. But also it is good to do the client side and maybe also to do the server side to make sure that actually what is coming from this client side is actually the data that one. So the browser doesn't have to connect it to the server to validate the form in client side validation. So the user finds out instantly if they have missed out some required fields. So there is basic validation that we really need to do on the client side. That doesn't make any sense to do it on the server side at all. So let's look at the client side form validation. So on the client side, we are saying that, let me just have maybe a highlighter there, right? So if you look at that, the here we have got a PC with the web browser. That's you here with your PC and the web browser. You are doing Googling, whatever that you are doing there. So the form validation there happens here at your browser there, and then we send the form data to the web server there after we have done the validation. That's the client side, right? Then the server side, you do whatever you want, then we send to the server here where we are hosting
The
the
volume has gone
website.
to my side.
Am I not audible? I think I'm audible. I think my
Yeah,
mic is recording
yes,
something. Yeah, so I think it's on your side because I'm seeing that the mic is recording here. Okay, so I was saying that so maybe you can try to rejoin if it remains like that. So I was saying that the server side validation happens here, not on your side. So it happens on the server where we are hosting the website or whatever, something like that. So that's what happens there. So uh consider a simple form with one text field called your name here. So our validation script will ensure that the user enters their name before the form is sent, something like that. So this can be achieved by adding a JavaScript function. So you could have a JavaScript function which would handle that. So this was just an example there that on submit there, like this attribute, then we call a function like validate form, and then we do that, and then that form will validate, and then before submitting, maybe if we return false, then it is not going to be submitted. But otherwise, if we return true, then the form will be what will be submitted, something like that. So that's what will be happening there. So this was just a form creation and some JavaScript there to do that. Maybe what you could do is just to save time. What you could do is to experiment and play around with the forms and link them with the PHP and then do some validation there where we are coding. I think that's the best way we can do this. So what I'm going to do here on this one, let me go to here on my here, let me remove this and let me remove the styles. I no longer need it. Nothing that I want to style here. All right. So what I'm going to do here, I want maybe let me here say HTML form, something like that, just the title that I'm putting there. So what I'm going to do here is to have a form, right? So on this form, so this is just a basic form that I'm going to have, right? So this basic form is going to have the first name, the last name, and maybe we submit that, right? Let me just refresh. Let me pick here. If I do this, I'm going to have this, the first name, the last name, and then we submit. So if you look at it, sorry, just want to come here. Okay. So if you look at it, we've got this HTML form that we have here. So this HTML form, we've got when you try to submit it, here you can use the post or the get, the method there. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use get, and I'll demonstrate on get there. So the first name, let me just put Ezekiel, and then the last, let me put door there. If I try to submit, you see that it will give you that the first name is Ezekiel, the last name is the what or something like that. So it actually tends to put everything that you put here, and then it will send with that URL, something like that. So if we intercept that, we could see everything on your URL, every data that you are trying to send, something like that, right? And then, but if you use the post there, you would see that if I try to submit something like this and then try to submit there, so I think it's just okay, let me just try to do this, and then you try to submit, then you see that there is nothing here at all. So basically this is what is happening. And where are we submitting? Why nothing is actually happening is because we do not have I think I need to accept the person who want to join. It's just because we did link this form with any PHP file to process this, right? So the action here, we are just submitting to this same PHP file. So it's going nowhere, something like that. So there is no PHP which is accepting this and doing something for that, something like that. So basically, this is what you could do, creating the form there, using post, using get, whatever. So maybe what else could I talk about? Now maybe let's link this one to any PHP file that I want to do there. Let me say my PHP there .php. So I'm just going to have a PHP file rather than see my php.php in here. So I've got this index. Let me just put another PHP file here. Then I'll say my php dot php, something like that. So I have this file. This is a PHP file which is going to handle that code, something like that. So normally when you want to write the PHP code, we normally put it in something like this. Then you say PHP, and then you close it by saying what? By putting this question mark. So there are ways of including PHP in your files, whatever. Please go and read about it as well. So this is what I'm just going to do. I'm going to take the first name and the last name and then display it. So how do I get the first name and the last name and display it? So normally, first, let me just take this. I think it's wiser for me to do this. Let's just try to take out this. So I want to escape to PHP. I think I could do this. Let me just experiment with it. So yeah, yes, you could see that it is writing here, displaying first name is Ezekiel, then last name whatever, or something like that. So what is happening here is that because we are submitting the form to this page itself. So here I'm escaping to PHP, right? Using these tags. You can go and read about ways to escape to PHP in an HTML file, whatever, or in this file, whatever. So for me to be able to write the PHP code, I will do this. So what is this that I've written? It's a variable, right? So go and read about what is a variable. You already know what is a variable. We've done C programming, we've done C++, we've done Java together. You know what is a variable. So maybe what you just need to know are the rules of naming variables here in PHP. So normally your PHP variable always starts with this mandatory value, the $sign, right? And then you name it whatever. The way we used to name variables in C programming also applies here. So you just do the same. So here, when you see this underscore, normally it's a global. Those global variables, we use this underscore. So why post? Because here we are using post. So that's why there's underscore post. And normally it's an array. So we use the name. So here the input f name. So if you put f name here, so what does that when you use post? So it puts in this global variable all these elements, whatever the input element, the input element, the input element, all these are elements are put in this what in this post. So to access them, you just need to put the key, and the key will be the name, this name, right? This name like this. So we are going to use f name and last name, and then we store those in these variables, and then we could print using echo out, and then this one is a string concatenation, and this BR is an HTML to just skip. So when it's rendering now, it takes this one as what as an HTML. So it skips a line. That's why you are seeing that first name, then da 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 da, and then this, then do, then something like that. So that's what is happening. So what if you want to use that page that we are using? Then that's when you now need to what? That's when you now need to post it to this my PHP. So just 2 minutes. So when you do this now, that's when the this data is going to be sent to this my PHP file. Excuse me, to this my PHP file, which is this one, and then it does process it and then sends it. Then it sends it back to whatever. But here we are not sending it back. We are just displaying, right, the data that we have received. We are not sending it to the database, whatever, something like that. So basically, if you look at it, if I send it, let's look at this. If I say Ezekiel Chimana, let me submit it. Then you see that here you are going to move from this index file, and then we are going to be in my php.file, and then we are going to just display the name there and the surname there, the first name and the last name. So basically that's how you play around, right? Or you play around this. So what if you use the get method there? So if you use the get method here, you could not use the post method if you are using the get method. So I know that we are going to get an error there. So if I go back here, refresh it, try to submit. So let me try to submit this. So I'll get an error there that the first name and the last name, whatever, why? Because I'm using the here I'm using the post, the global post. So I'm trying to access the defined key, something like that, because there is no first name in this post, in this global variable, something like that. So what do you use there? You use the get, something like this, and then here you also change it to what, to get, something like that. And then now if I refresh it, I'll receive this just like that. Then boom, you are good to go. So I think that's the issue of the get and the post there. And how do you submit the data for processing? And then how do you process it? It's up to you. What do you want? For me, I just wanted to display this data, something like that, right? So if there are numbers, you want to perform addition, subtraction, whatever, what you want to do, you could just do it by just receiving those, and then you do the operation that you want to do, something like that. Okay, so what if these ones are not set, like where we're getting those errors as well? So you could check if they are set or if they are not what, they are not set, something like that, right? So how do you do that? Maybe you would do protect it using if is set, right? So if is set, what do you do? Normally we want to set, we want to check if underscore get Then we want to check the submit there. If the submit is what is set, something like that. So what we want to do is to protect this whole code inside the submit. So what we want to do is, if you have clicked the submit button, then we do all these things. Otherwise, we do not do this. So if I come here and refresh this, because you didn't click the button to submit here, then you get nothing, right? What else? Okay. Okay, let me type here and like this. And then if I say submit, because I've submitted, I'm getting nothing there. Why am I getting nothing there? Get post my PHP, whatever. Maybe let me check if they submit. Okay, let me check here. Maybe the type is submit, the value is submit there. But it was supposed to auto detect it. I don't think. Let me just give it a name, submit there, and maybe let me just refresh it. Let me play around with it. I think. Okay, yes. So I was supposed to give it a name, right? Because I think the issue of names, we have said that if you did give it a name, it's not just going to be sent. So I was supposed to give it a name. So after doing that, then it will check if this submit is set, this button is set. So if it is set, then it will process that data, right? So if you look at it, let me try to go to my PHP direct without. So what happens is I will just get nothing here if I refresh. Why? Because this whole code is protected inside this if it's set button. So what it means is that this code is now protected whenever we didn't submit a form, so we do not do anything that is to do with this form, something like that. So that's what is happening there. That's how you protect that code there. Okay. Maybe something to talk about now is the issue of validation. What if you want to do validation, right? You want to use JavaScript. Normally, JavaScript for validation, you can put the script inside the head, or maybe just here, just after the body there, you can put your script there. So let's just put the script here, right? Script, let me do so. So I'm going to put the script there. Why this script? I want to do form validation. So let me just put this to shorten it, whatever. So we are going to have the form validate there. So here instead of this, yes, we want to have let's look at this. Okay. It's just a code that I auto-generate. Okay, so I'm going to have the validate form, right? So this is just a function in a JavaScript, right? So this function, what does it do? We are going to set the variable called valid to true, right? So the way you declare variables in JavaScript is a little is different from the way we do it in PHP. In PHP, we use the dollar sign, but here it's a little bit different. So you just also need to familiarize yourself with JavaScript. But otherwise, if you look at this, just an if statement like what we used to write, right? So this is the if statement there. So what we want to do is want to check if the first name dot value. So you say document conduct form. Do we have the form is conduct form? The name is not conduct form there, right? So I think we need to give also it a name there. This form, we need to give it a name exactly. We just need to give it a name. Or instead of doing this, okay, instead of doing this, we just need to say on a submit, let's call this, right? Say so it's something that we really need to do, to say on a submit, let's call this. But here we just need to use get element by ID. Sorry for this, I'm trying to make it is so you can use get element by ID document dot get element by ID, then you say first name, and then you check if it is something like that, and then da 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 da. So what you do here is that when now you are submitting the form, you need to put this right on submit, then you return validate form. What happens is that it will check what happens is that it will call this function, right? After calling this function, it will check if first name have got a file. If it doesn't have a file, it will give you an alert that please enter the form, enter your first name, and then after that, it will set valid to false, and then after that we return a valid, so return false. Otherwise, if the first name is not empty, we are not going to get in here to set the valid to false. So we just return a valid, and the valid will be true. So we just return true, something like that. So that's what we'll be doing there. It's just an example showing you how do you validate a form using, or how do you do the client side validation there using the PHP, something like that. So if I try to submit it, to say please enter your first name, and then it doesn't submit the form. But what if I just put Ezekiel here and try to submit? So you see that it will just send there, and then I have the first name here, but the last name is empty. Why? Because I didn't do the client side validation properly. I didn't validate the last name, something like that. So basically, that's how you'll be playing around with this validation. So you could also do it for the last name. How do you do it? You could also just do the same thing here, but now it will be what? So now instead of this one, it will be for the what? For the last name. And then here also it will be what? It will be please enter your last name there. So what happens is here, let me just try to submit, please. And then please enter your last name, something like that. So sometimes this might not be the best way to do it, to just put there as an alert, or maybe, but I think it's just good to do so. So sometimes you could just return false when it does that. Otherwise, you just return true, something like that. Like here, train force, something like that. But so that's how you do the client side validation there. You just need to put this on submit there, and then here you just need to have that function which will be just doing that validation. And then what if you want to do the validation on the server side? So you just submit, and then you do the PHP code right on the script side, where you will do like here, if you look at it, we've actually checked if it is set. So it's part of the validation to check if this is set, and then so you could do the logic to check if this one is empty or if this one is what. But basically that's what you do there, and then you could play around with it. So what you do is you to write the code, right? Or whatever that you think you could do with this. Like here we've taken data there, and then you try to check whatever. If it is for password, you want to check the length of it. Is it whatever, 8 numbers, whatever, something like that. So you could play around it. You could look for it as well. There are some regular expressions that you could use to do that as well. But what I would want to look at is the issue of connecting to the database, right? So whenever I want to connect to the database, maybe communicating with the database, there are things that you really want. Maybe I would go to this database, the PHP admin. If you look at it here, I've got this, the user root, and then I'll be using localhost, which is this one, or the IP address 127.0.0.1. This one is one that you'll be using. So for you to connect to this database, you need this IP address or this local host, and then you need the user, which is going to be the root. If there is a password, then you use a password. Like here, I normally use a password, but today I'm no longer using a password. So there's no password here. But if you really need to set a password, then you put password, then you set your password, and then you use that password to connect to this, something like that. So that's what you really need to add. So I will do here. I have got this DB connect, which was some code there to connect to a database. So normally what you need if you want to connect to a database, let me just show you what you need, like this one, the server. So you just need this local host, this root, and then the password is empty. So you just keep it empty. And then also you need the database name as well. if you really want to connect to the exact database, whatever, if you just want to connect to the server there, whatever, without the database, but it's always good. Maybe you want to create the database later, so you to leave this database name. You just create the connection there. But because you want to connect to the database, maybe the database is already there, so you just pass this DB name. So you call MySQL I connect this method. And this method, what it does, it connects to the database, right? And then so you pass it with this order: the server name, the username, the password, and the database name. So instead of maybe start initializing to the database, sorry, to the variables here, you could just write it direct. There's no problem. You put in quotes localhost, you here in quotes root, here in quotes nothing there, and then the database name you put demos database, demos DB, something like that, and then you check if the connection if actually what connected successfully, just for error handling, something like that. So here we're checking if the error, if the connection was actually successful. If it is so, you do whatever you want to do. You insert the data that you want to insert or whatever, something like that. So that's what you do if you want to connect to the database, right? So let me just have a look with do I still have that database called demos what blah blah blah. Okay, what I have is the demo TB here. Okay, what I could do is instead of this, okay, let me take this maybe some ways. Okay, here. So instead of sending the data to, so what I would want to do is to have the DB connect. Instead of sending the data to my PHP, whatever, I'm sending it to DB Connect, right? So what is happening here is that when I come here, sorry, when I come here and try to refresh this, whatever, and try to submit this, okay, because there's validation there, I need to put these values and then try to submit. What is happening there? It is submitting to DB Connect, and I'm getting nothing there. Why? Because I think it's failing to connect to the database, but because I've got the if here or error while connecting whatever. If not connect, okay, so it have connected to the database successfully, but nothing is being happened, nothing is happening there. Okay, so there's nothing which is happening there. So I just really need to check here now, what do I need to do? So let me just echo out that the database have got connected successfully. Okay, so it means that the code is connecting to the database, but it's doing nothing. Okay, so what if I now want to send that data to the database, right? So what do I need is to just first accept or take these things, right? So let me just take this script that we already have here. Instead of cutting it, let me just take it here. So we just wanted to take the values and put them in variables, whatever. So instead of just echoing out those values, we want to store them in the database. So how do you do that? You create, so what do you do there? Sorry, I just need to, okay, so what I want to do is to create an SQL statement, right? So this SQL statement, this is what you've been doing in database. So I'm not going to look at it much, but you create an SQL statement like the insert into, if you want to insert. So here we're going to insert into a table called the students. And then in this table, we're going to match the column first name and last name. So we are going to put the first name and last name in that table, just like that, right? As simple as that. So what it does, it is going to, so this one just is a prepare, or that we have prepared this statement. So we need to run this statement after doing this. So we need to run this statement. So how do you do that? We use the connection that we already have, right? Why am I getting that error? I think let me look at this. MySQL, then a new record have been created successfully, and then we close this, and then we close that. So where is the error coming from? Okay, I think it's on the issue of what? Let's look at this. Okay, I think there's this part which is not closed. We need to close that bracket. I think it's that bracket. Okay, and then we need to close the connection. Whenever you finish to work with the database, it's always good to close that connection. Okay, so what is happening is that here, the right thing that you need to do is just to call MySQL query to send a query to the database. So that function takes the connection that we've created here, that we already created, and then it will send that query, right? That we have here. So the next thing is to make sure that the database have got the table called what? Called the students. Otherwise, if we try to send that thing, we have an error that demos database students that doesn't exist. Why? Because the table called students doesn't exist. So you need to create that what do you call it? That table called what? Called students, just like that. So I think it's very, very clear and straightforward, right? So what what am I looking at? I'm looking at a database called demos database. And then inside that database, I need to create a table called students. And then that table should have these two columns. So you could write also an SQL command to create that table using the PHP, whatever, something like that. But I'm not going to do that. Let me just come here. Let me look for demos, whatever. This database is what that I'm looking for. So I'm going to create a table here. And this table needs to have what? Two columns, and it should be students. If it's I think it's a students rather than a student. I think it's students. Okay, so it is supposed to have first name and then the last name, and then what else here? It should be maybe var character or var character of size, maybe let me say 30, 30, something like that. And then let me just save. Okay. So after doing this, then what am I going to do here? What I'm going to do here is very, very simple. I'm going to put my details there and then submit. Then you see new record successfully what? Created successfully. So if I come here, if I do this, then if I try to browse this, I'm sure I will get this is a question mark, this record. So now the database is now linked. Now maybe if you want to make a query to select from the database and then display the data there on your website, now it's now the work of the PHP. You could do that as well by selecting the data from here and then what? And then try to show that. But otherwise, here we've created the table, whatever the database, and then now we are installing what we are now we are storing values from our form, right? So that's how you take the input from the user, maybe send it to the right PHP script, and then send it straight to the database there, something like that. So that's how you can really do it. So if you want to take it from the database, maybe back to the user, now you need to use maybe the while loop to loop through whatever you have sent here, something like that. So basically, that's what you'll be doing there, right? You could submit another one, but maybe I'm just submitting the same whatever because I didn't design it the other way round, so it will be just so if I come here and refresh this, you'll find these details that you'll be doing, that you'll be sending here, something like that, right? So maybe what I would do is I'll leave it here. Maybe some of the things, a lot of things we would do when we are doing the coding session, but basically that's what you do. Maybe for now I would ask if there are questions or maybe contributions. Otherwise, for today we'll do call it a day. I will do. I think I would experiment with a lot of things when it comes to PHP, whatever. We'll do experiment when we're trying to come up with the question that we would want to answer, and then maybe demonstrating on how do we approach these questions, how do we answer them, how do we link with them. But I think we've done the basics that we really need for you to understand why JavaScript, why PHP, why CSS, why HTML. It maybe how do you link these two things? How do you work with all these things? So for now, maybe if there are questions, I think that's the time that you to ask if there are questions. Well, there were people who wanted to join. I'm very sorry for that. I didn't see that. But otherwise, I don't know if there are questions. Those who want to ask questions, maybe contributions, if there are contributions. Okay, so if there are no contributions or no questions, I think everything is very clear to you. So what I will say is please have a good night there. I'm out.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.